The thing that we learned is that the all revenue bonds, according to the approach that Congress and the Treasury Department has taken, are now tainted or threatened to be tainted with the stigma of being industrial aid bonds. This is the real problem we're dealing with. It affects or amounts to a threat of the tax exemption of most every type of revenue bond that you can conceive, because ultimately you derive most revenues from some commercial or private source.
In other words, if Congress can't be convinced to change its stand on this, the jumbo airports, not only here but other places, may well be faced with extinction before they're built.
Well, it just means that when you lose a tax exemption, it means your interest is going to go up, and when that happens, you either build a smaller airport or you get additional revenues.
Do you think Congress can be convinced to change its stand?
Yes, I do. If we have a concerted effort by affected political bodies, such as the group we met with today, the airport board, and others about the state who are under the same problem.
Is this going to cause a slowdown in the construction, or can the work on Congress and the work on the airport go simultaneously?
No, sir. They're going ahead at the same time, and we hope to go right quick on both.
A 26-year-old Fort Worth man, Artie Stell Wittenberg, who told police he has worked as a female impersonator, has been arrested by Arlington police and is now charged with murder in the death of 60-year-old Carl B. Wilson of 1912 Chambers Street in Fort Worth. Wilson's body was found Wednesday morning lying just in the western edge of Lake Arlington by a couple driving by. Wittenberg was initially arrested on charges of carrying a prohibited weapon. A district court jury today returned the opinion that Sammy Ray Stout is sane. Stout had spent almost a year at Rusk State Hospital for the criminally insane after he was charged with, but before he could come to trial, on charges of robbery and armed robbery. The opinion that he is sane means now that Stout can assist an attorney in his defense and thus may be charged in both cases and tried for both robbery and armed robbery. City Councilman R.M. Sharkey Stovall has called a press conference in Fort Worth for tomorrow afternoon. A spokesman for Stovall would say very little about what the press conference would deal with, but it seems safe from here to assume that he's going to announce he is a candidate for mayor. DeWitt McKinley, who now holds that seat, probably, although he has not yet announced, will also run for another term as mayor. This is Jerry Taft in Arlington for Channel 8 News.
What amazed me is that the becalming effect even these incidents have on the people. Of course, they're irritated, they're annoyed by these incidents, especially where there's jeopardy of life and limb. But we who read about this from the outside tend to react more violently than the Israelis themselves. They've learned to accept this as part of a war of nerves, as part of a state of belligerency. And even though the party affected naturally suffers excruciating pains and reactions, nonetheless the people say this is part of the price we're paying until a peace is permanently effected in this section of the country. But I would say that there's a calm but determined reaction on the part of the people. But it's people outside of the country who tend to exaggerate these incidents. They're not exaggerated by the Israelis.
I have a deep-seated feeling that the Israelis and the Arabs could really learn sooner or later, perhaps later, to talk to one another, to realize that they can do things together that they can't do separately, that they all want to rear their children and live in peace and so forth. But the state of Israel and Iraq and Syria and Jordan are part of this world that gets closer and closer, so that anything that happens anywhere in the world, whether it's in the UN or President Nixon going on his trip, this affects the Middle East.
Do you think this trip by President Nixon will have a good or bad effect on peace in the Middle East?
You're talking to a clergyman who hopes and prays it will have a good effect.
Let me ask you this. Did you hear Israelis reacting to the election of Richard Nixon as president?
Yes. Interestingly enough, they say that they have always considered President Nixon a friend of the state of Israel and its aspirations. And they have high hopes that the powers of the world will help bring about peace in the Middle East. They are prepared for war. But I have never seen such a peace-loving people. After all, the Holy Land is a